Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican, featuring the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and today we are going global to talk about an exciting project from Dr. Estevan Rael-Gálvez, former state historian and the founder of Native Bound Unbound. Welcome, Estevan.
Inez, I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for hosting me.
Oh, it's really wonderful to talk to you about this. I think we should start at the beginning. First, we have to explain to everybody what is Native Bound Unbound and how did you conceive of what is becoming a massive undertaking?
Oh my gosh, to start at the beginning, a project like this, any project of such great magnitude always has an origin story. I'll tell that in a moment, but you've also asked, what is this? So we are creating a digital initiative where we are working to recover every documented instance of indigenous slavery across the Western Hemisphere.
Oh, man.
Yeah, you almost have to take a breath after that.
Yeah.
And as you know, in Pueblo communities, we learn early on that wherever we go, we leave our breath behind us. And it feels like that invocation is precisely what we're ready, we've been getting ready to do, to actually illustrate this, which is just a starting point. We've been at it for 4 years, but we're going to premiere this project that will show documents, which has been our primary sort of focus, but we're also showing art, artifacts, architecture. We're mapping this all out. I have team members from Quebec and Montreal to Argentina, from California to Cuba. We have several people working in Europe. So in that way, it has become global. But in the end, people have asked, is it a database? Yes, it's a database because you'll be able to look for individuals. Is it a repository? Yes, because you'll be able to read original records in their original form, in their transcription and their translation. But I think of it as, particularly when we're launching in 9 days, I think we're building an ofrenda. Something that honors the past and connects those past ancestors to the present.
Oh, that's just such a gift to people, especially people like us, who are of mestizo heritage, who probably are descendants, and you are for sure, but descendants of people who were held in slavery, the people who captured them. And you have to come to grips with all these parts of your heritage. And this is going to be a place where you can go look. And even if you don't find your own grandparents, you're going to learn the story of what happened to people.
Absolutely, Inez. When I wrote my dissertation over 25 years ago, I made a statement, hyperbole at best. I said, there's not a single New Mexican, and I can now extend that to Mexicanos, people from Peru, Bolivia, but certainly I argued then, there's not a single New Mexican who does not descend from at least one indigenous enslaved person, whether that story is known or not. Now, what's interesting is our project, because we're getting granular into the details, will be able to prove me either correct, right, or wrong. But I'm sure at some level, globally, because slavery is part of the human condition. It's the most inhuman of activities, but also the thing that, unfortunately, has made us human historically. There's not a single community, I think, I'm going to go broad here. There's not a single community globally that has not been in some way impacted by slavery across time and space.
Oh, I guess we do have things in common. As much as everyone's fighting today, that's something we do share as
Absolutely.
humans. So this is obviously, we've talked about this already. It's a global project. You have scholars, students, technology experts, universities helping, but you were inspired from a particular place because of your roots in New Mexico, or
Yeah.
where did you get your inspiration at the beginning?
Well, I love to say that this now hemispheric global initiative has its roots here. It does, if no for no other reason because I have initiated it. But for me, I had the honor and the privilege of starting this journey out with stories. And that's how it always begins in many ways. I was I think I was about 6 or 7 years old, whatever that was, in 1976 when Alex Haley's Roots was syndicated on
Okay.
TV. Inez, you remember this
I
moment,
do.
right?
Oh, someone took a television to a district championship basketball game when I was in high school so they could see the last episode.
Yeah.
We didn't
And
have phones, we didn't have you couldn't watch TV anywhere, but they had their TV with an antenna to watch it at the game. It was
yeah,
huge.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was a monumental moment. And as we approach 2026, I think it's the 75-year anniversary. I hope I'm doing my math correct
Wow.
of that anniversary when it aired in a moment when there were four channels on television, something like that, right?
Yep.
And if I remember correct, it was a nightly series, not sort of a weekly, but a nightly series. And even, my mom and dad, I was growing up in a small village of northern New Mexico. My mom and dad sat us down, and those stories deeply imprinted upon me.
Yes.
I to this day I can name the characters, I can recite lines. Um, I think of something my grandmother always said, a little bit
Mhm.
differently than I'm about to say, but when a story is being told with good intentions, when it's told well, it should always invite another story to be told.
Yeah.
And there I was either at home in my parents' house in Jaroso or with my grandma in Cuesta watching that series every night. And so even though it was a different story, different from my experience, there was something in it that felt familiar.
Yep.
And part of that was because there were two stories also being told in my family. One, my great grandmother, who had been taken from our village in Costilla up to Pueblo, Colorado, we would go visit her every year. Her name, we would call her Grandma Nea. Um, and she was Dulcinea Ariano. And every year
Mm.
that we went to go visit her, she would bring me close to her, and she told the same story every time of La India Panana. I didn't know what that meant then, but she was referring to an ancestor who was Pawnee, who had been captured and enslaved,
Oh.
and she told that story. Recently, about 5 years ago, we found a cassette tape of her telling the story, and
Oh.
I felt like I was 5 years old all over again because she told that story and was honoring this ancestor, and she wanted me to know that this was who I was.
So
And,
you didn't
and
grow up thinking you were Spanish?
I certainly didn't. And so I mean, here was my great grandmother telling me the story in such a loving way, connecting this woman, and she apologized. She said, "I wish we remember her name," to this child growing up.
Oh,
And
that is
then the second story, my mom folded this blanket into my arms when I was going off to college. I went to UC Berkeley. And when I went off, she folded this into my arms. She said, "For protection, strength, and knowledge."
mm.
And the Raeles from Cuesta always told the same story of an ancestor who had been captured, a Dene, a Navajo ancestor, who as a child had been captured, brought into the village of Abiquiu. And everyone, no matter what branch or clan of Raeles, talked about this matriarch. And that framed a sense of their identity. It's true what you said. Some family talked about, oh, the Raeles are from Lorca in the province of Murcia in Spain. but almost everyone spoke of this matriarch. It framed our sense of identity. And according to the story, she passed this down to her grandson, my grandfather, Jose Albino, and my mother put it in my hands, and it's gone with me ever since. So that was the origin story. And I went on and I thought to myself, I can't be unique. There's
Yeah.
no way. I'm going to write a dissertation on this. I'm going to focus on this in a rigorous way. I was trained as both an anthropologist and a historian, and that became the focus of my doctoral work
Yeah.
back then.
What fascinates me as you talk about the project and conversations we've had over the years too is that obviously in the United States we focus on chattel slavery on the East Coast, with the Africans who were brought here against their will. But I think there's kind of almost a loss of memory, or maybe they never understood how many indigenous people were enslaved. We knew about Columbus doing it, but I don't know that we realized growing up that it continued in the way that it did. Because you talk about it as captives, but no one says, but
Mhm.
those captives became slaves. You know,
Yeah. And the project, we are actually going to address this issue of nuance and
mhm,
language. We're going to have a vocabulary, a terminology sheet so that people can understand the variations of, or what I refer to as euphemisms.
okay,
Because slavery under the Spanish Empire, and we're looking at multiple empires, was rendered illegal in 1542.
okay,
So it was legal between 1492 and 1542. Not that it mattered, because there were all these legal loopholes after 1542 that would continue to justify and allow for this to happen. But what also happened in that moment were all these terms that were invented. I argue euphemisms, terms like criado,
yeah,
terms like sirviente and peon, even peon, more modern terms that were invented to obfuscate this.
yeah,
But for me, it all comes back to people who were enslaved,
yeah, yeah.
people who were captured, removed from their homelands and families and their ancestry forever.
Right. They couldn't go back. Do most Genízaros come from the enslaved people that then became Hispanicized, or is that a separate strain that's going on at the same time?
Thank you for asking about the term Genízaro. In many ways, what's interesting is that people who refer to the term Genízaro in a place like New Mexico today sort of conflate it with slavery.
Okay.
And it's true that it's one of several terms that was used in a place like New Mexico to actually define who these people were. But it's more what you started to say. People were captured from enemy tribes, people, Comanches, Comanches, Apache, Indian people, Ute, Paiute. And eventually, in time, those people became an ethnic category that would be referred to as Genízaro. And like, as with any slave system, people could be freed after a time period, even if that freedom came only in death. And that was every bit as true of people who were identified in the records as Genízaros.
Okay. That's an interesting explanation because you wonder if there were other ways of being Hispanicized and whether like the Pecos Pueblo people who stayed in the village as opposed to going to Jemez, were those people slaves or were they just did they blend in? That's part of it's always complicated.
It,
Yeah.
it is always complicated, and we're trying to at least unfold the
Hmm.
narrative in a way to actually explain at least part of the context for the complications. I can say a lot more about Pecos, but it likely that those were individuals who were not enslaved. But if their labor was being forced in
Yeah.
any way at the individual level, they certainly are going to be relevant to our project.
That makes sense. Now you started the project, you got a really whopping grant, and then started the work. Did it immediately go throughout the Spanish Empire to all the corners, or were you focused on New Mexico and it grew out of that? How did it develop?
Ah, such a great question. Thank you for asking that. So it's true. In 2022, we received a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to actually catalyze this work. I had been dreaming about it for decades in many ways, and I had actually developed a database, just a database, different than a repository. I wasn't looking at records in terms of incorporating records, but I had done that for Colorado and New Mexico, our region. And so when I pitched the idea to Elizabeth Alexander at the Mellon Foundation, I was already thinking global. Part of it, Inez, you'll know that part of it is that I think I've been I'm a slavery scholar that whose work is much broader in terms of indigenous studies than our region. But then I became the state historian of New Mexico, and there's something that like pigeonholed me a little bit regionally. And so when I was pitching the project, I thought this project has to be much broader than what it is because at the core, slavery was moving people around.
Right.
I was studying, for instance, an individual who had been captured in the plains, what we know of today as Kansas, had come into New Mexico. Next time we see him is in northern Mexico. Then we see him in Veracruz. Then we see him in Cuba. Then we see him in Seville. So the reality is
Wow.
that slavery is moving people across those political boundaries, not just states like New Mexico, but national. And those political boundaries are shifting across empires. So, but I knew New Mexico in the region, right? And it was easy for me to start in that way. But there was a groundswell almost immediately. In February, March of 2022, someone contacted me who had done work on Paraguay and said, "Hey, I've been waiting for you. Are you focused in Latin America? Can we become part of the project?" We had an individual who was sent to us from working on Ontario, someone working on Brazil. So almost immediately in 2022, it became what I had envisioned. I didn't think it would happen so quickly, but it started to become a hemispheric project.
Wow. All the pieces fell right. We'll be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
We make renewable doable. We're positive energy solar for a cleaner, brighter future for all. Positive energy's the right call. Feel good about your energy bill. Help save the planet too. Your trusted solar company, working hard for you. Generate positive energy. Positive energy solar.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Estevan Rael-Gálvez about Native Bound Unbound, which is going live very soon. We may air right after it debuts, but it's going to be brand new in November. You and I met, 20 plus years ago in the lobby of the Taos News. And I always remember this because you were placing an opinion piece asking people for stories about their captive ancestors.
Wow.
And
Thank you for reminding me that.
and I remembered it because I'm pretty sure that we had some of those in our family. We've just never been able to sort it. So we kind of bonded talking about that. And I always thought, like, you've explained the story of your ancestors and why you asked for those stories. But what did you get? Did you start gathering them right away? Because was that when you were working on your dissertation, or was it after?
Well, if it was for my dissertation, which it sounds like,
Yep.
I it was more than 20 years ago, Inez. It would have been even before I became state historian, which was in 2001.
Oh, yeah. It
So
was
it would
like 98, 99.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was, and I suspect it was when I was a scholar at the School for Advanced Research,
Okay.
doing just that work, and I was gathering that information. So I bet you it was 1999.
Yeah.
And so. Um, what was interesting is, yes, I gathered so many stories in audio, and I was doing that work throughout New Mexico in the Navajo reservation in different places. I mean, the I was trained as an anthropologist and an ethnographer, and essentially I was gathering stories. Over 100 interviews that I did with individuals.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't remember how many people responded to the paper, but it was more word of mouth, right? It
Yeah.
was more people would come to me and say, Esteban, well, I have a neighbor or I have a tia. They would lean in, Inez, and they would whisper these stories.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was reflecting on that with someone else recently, and they said, have you seen a shift when you started doing this work professionally to now? And then I said, it was interesting because they were whispering those stories, like almost literally. And now it feels like there's been a groundswell of people sort of
Yeah.
gravitating toward recovering that, and they're just speaking normally.
Oh, that's a great growth. I mean, it's kind of like in New Mexico. You know, I'm a little older than you are, but when we grew up, you know, my grandma was Spanish American, blah blah blah, and my mother and she used to argue because my mother said, "Of course we have native blood. It's just obvious," and that was just like a long argument in our family. And now everybody is getting tested and saying, "Wow, I'm 30% indigenous or 40% indigenous." And then you get to the point, well, how did that come about? And it happened because somebody got captured or was, you know, frankly, they were raped or something. And it makes it a lot more complicated. But everyone I know is more proud of that heritage than they might have been at one time,
Absolutely.
you know?
Part of it is that the mythology that framed New Mexico post US conquest
Yeah.
was about erasing those origins, erasing our connections to Mexico, erasing our connections to indigenous people. And there's so much knowledge that happened in that erasure, so much wisdom, but at the same time, and so much mythologized, and it feels like we're working towards recovering that. I should also say that as I've thought about this work towards recovering that over the years, I've also recognized that my work is deeply immersed in the subject of historic trauma.
Yeah.
And I think of their modern manifestations of historic trauma that manifests themselves in different ways, in poverty and drug abuse. But I think for me, I don't know if I'm not a psychologist or I don't think at that deep level, but I think it's tied to not knowing where you come from,
Yeah.
including the enslaved. To be able to sit here today and look at and feel the power of this blanket that almost wraps behind me, to know that this woman created it in spite of her, whatever experience she had.
Yeah.
She created beauty and had children who had children who had children. And it makes me think of, we have this wonderful, you have to interview her. We have this amazing intern who came to us who's a student at Santa Fe Prep. And her mother is families are from Peru, and her father's family is Mexico. They come originally from California. Her name is Camila Carrion. Aside from being brilliant, she did a video for me the other day, just as a sample for asking our other participants to do the same for our launch. There's this moment when she says, "When I do this work, I am the daughter of daughters of the Incan Empire." Powerful.
Yeah.
And that's also what inspires my work.
Yeah. There's an irony in a sense that a people so rooted, and I'm specifically talking about northern New Mexico. I mean, in a sense, we know where we come from because we've been in this place forever, but we don't know how the parts came together necessarily, or if we did, we weren't honest about it. So I think that has to be some kind of a burden on your soul that maybe this project will help people with.
Yeah, I so when the President Mellon Foundation asked me in 2022, who are you doing this project for? It's going to be open to the general public, obviously. It will be used for educators. I hope to change curriculum for scholars, for artists. But I said what I hope this really impacts, and the reason we're doing this is for descendant communities and for Indigenous communities to make those connections, to actually be able to understand how they descend from that past, and that really matters to me.
Oh, and it's so important. It's like when you start doing genealogy and you find out, like my family did, that we had ancestors that went through Abiquiu before they got to Mora, and also were in San Miguel del Vado. And then you read about it and find out those were all Genízaro communities, and it kind of changes your perception of what might they have been, And I think everybody wants to know more about their past that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We all want to be able to connect. And what's interesting is so many New Mexicans often say, I'm 20th generation New
Hmm.
Mexican. And
Yep.
of course, Pueblo people and other indigenous people say 20.
That's
That's
right. But
nothing. But
but it,
here's the reality,
yeah.
even with Hispano New Mexicans who say that 20th generation, that a family tree actually goes in multiple directions.
Yes.
And when you're tracing, and if I'm correct about the fact that every New Mexican has at least one indigenous enslaved ancestor, that means it's much more than 20
Yeah.
generations, right?
No, that's
It
true.
takes you further back.
No.
And the depth of that, the profundity of that has meaning.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, my mom is 16, but the first one we can find of her family is an indigenous woman. So obviously it goes back beyond that. So
Absolutely.
it's complicated. I mean, it's complicated and wonderful at the same time because again, especially in the times where people are talking about who's this kind of an American or that kind of American, we're from a people that are always here.
Right.
Parts of us weren't, but there's an origin story that goes all the way back.
Right.
So,
As my grandmother said, you're not part this or that. You are. You are.
oh,
This is who you are, who we are. And as you've read much of my writing over the years, Inez, and they
mhm,
said, we are like nesting dolls, one inside the other, inside the other, inside the
yeah,
other. And I think of it like that rather than parts, but we're this beautiful textile, quilt,
yeah.
whatever.
That's right. We're woven together. Anyway, on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santaFeNewMexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We're back with Conversations Different, talking to Dr. Estevan Rael-Gálvez about his project, Native Bound Unbound, and what's going to be happening very soon. Probably by the time this airs, it will be up and running. But tell us about the website, the archives, the digital resource that all of the people who want to do research can find soon.
Thank you for the question, Inez. So the project, we're 4 years into developing it. We've created an online digital initiative, so it's a website. And the reality is it will be decades in the making, right? Because we're processing material, we're identifying records, we're digitizing those records, we're transcribing them fully, translating them, and coding them. So if we have a Maria Antonia Kiowa, who is listed in a 1750 census in Santa Fe or Taos, and then we find a baptism for her a few years earlier, and then we find a death record for her, or her listed in a last will and testament, we're connecting all of those, and we have a process for how to do this. We're connecting all of those together. So when we launch in early November, the project will actually have a number of those records that have been processed, but we're going to continue to work on those. We wanted to launch with what we refer to as proofs of concept. And those proofs actually to be able to show the magnificent depth of a project like this and its possibility. So we'll have records from Brazil, from Argentina, from Canada, from
Wow.
many places, not every place. Even New Mexico won't be complete at all, maybe for another few years. But so what we're going to ask people to do is keep coming back. And if you want to participate, share those things. But even though we have focused for 4 years primarily on documents, we're also going to be showing artifacts, things like brooms, or painful things like a halter and chains, things like this, an artifact like a blanket. We'll be showing every illustration that we can possibly find, whether those are codices that show Malencine, for instance, or drawings of the woman Tituba, who was captured in the coast of Venezuela and brought up to Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
But we're also mapping things.
Yeah.
So all kinds of like the imprints that will be gathered and curated on the site will actually continue to grow every single day.
Why do you think people have been unaware of the depth of this slavery and captivity and moving around of people until fairly recently?
That's such a great question, Inez. I think the story of the marginalized people, what Eduardo Galeano would have referred to as los ninguneados, the nobodied, those stories of children, of women, of the enslaved, those are not the stories that often get told when the victors have been writing the stories for a long time, right? So the lions don't tell the stories of the hunt, the hunters tell the stories. And so, as I'm paraphrasing an African proverb, but basically that's part of the reason why these stories get obscured. How archives then get created also define that. So it's not just who is writing this history, it's who are the individuals who are inscribing those histories. Right. And how the archivists, or those people who are creating an archive, a colonial based archive, how they organize it.
Yeah.
So through all of these processes across time, there is these stories like those of people who are enslaved get obscured and sometimes erased entirely. It's any wonder. We have millions of documents. People have said to me, there must be so few documents. By casualidad, by chance, we actually have so many records. And it's because, in part, the Spanish were good chroniclers.
Yeah.
They wanted to chronicle, not that they didn't bring their own bias and ethnocentrism to those documents. They certainly did. But there's actually a great deal of documentation, and that's what we're bringing together.
Yeah. No, they wrote everything down and baptized you and wrote your name. And then when you got married, they investigated you, and you always would have a couple of, godparents along the way. So when you're doing research, you have a record to go to. And that's definitely something interest. I don't know. I think sometimes we had let those records sit, and what you're doing is bringing them to the light so that we can use
Absolutely.
them. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely true.
What has been a reaction to the finding and naming of the people who were enslaved? Are people, the descendants, ready to hear that they are both slave and enslaved, ancestor, that our ancestors did those things? Are they ready to hear it?
Um, I'm I I can only judge this based on the people who we've been engaging with.
Hmm.
And even during the course of this project, not even accounting for the conversations I've been having for decades. But if we think about this for the past few years, and those we've had what I refer to as memory workshops. We've had them mostly regionally here in northern New Mexico. We've had some in Texas and in Nevada as well. We're starting to have them in different places, but those memory workshops, I can judge what people are saying at those. We also have this magnificent collaboration with StoryCorps where we've recorded 50 conversations of individuals talking about their ancestor, and most of those have been enslaved ancestors, but there have been a few of those conversations where they're talking about ancestors who also enslaved.
Right.
And so people are those conversations that I've just mentioned, people are very willing to immerse themselves in the tension points around this, to talk about what does it mean for us to even remember those individuals. And it's actually surfaced very poignant moments in the conversations that make people themselves during the course of the conversations weep. And I think
Mhm.
will also make those who hear those conversations weep. They're hard conversations,
Yeah.
right? It's actually not easy to actually talk about what that means. One of the conversations I had on StoryCorps was with one of my best friends, Teresa Pascual from Acoma Pueblo. And we were talking about what does a project like this, recovering the history of slavery, mean for a community like Acoma?
Yeah.
People who were following the massacre in 1599 actually then lost most of its community. Its children under the age of 12 were taken down the Camino Real into Mexico City, forever displaced. And if you've
Oh.
ever been on a tour in Acoma, they point out a hole that's in the wall near the mission. That hole is left there for the spirits of those who were taken away to return.
Oh.
And that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah, I mean, it's still with us. It's, and I think most New Mexicans may not realize that the system, I guess they called it the peon system. It continued until the federal government outlawed it after we became a territory after the Civil War. Isn't that right? Or in the middle of it? When was that finally outlawed?
1867.
Wow.
1867. So yes, the peonage was basically a continued manifestation of slavery that would continue to happen. And again, it was just a different representation of the same sort of experiences that people had been experiencing for generations. I'll give you an example of some of your listeners and readers who are just in the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado. There was a woman by the name of Guadalupe Gallegos who had been captured in the home of Dario Gallegos living in San Luis, Colorado. And she was still showing up in the census records in the home of the grandchildren of her former captors as late as the 1940s.
Wow.
Still living in those places, still,
Oh.
mind you, being listed with the term servant.
God. That's It just shows you how recent this is and how it is in the memory of people who are still living. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Have you gotten much pushback from people who say this isn't really how it was? They were servants, they weren't slaves or anything like that? What's the reaction been?
You know, during the course of this project itself, maybe
Mhm.
because we haven't launched, we haven't received any pushback really. But because I've been at this for decades, I certainly have had conversations with folks who say exactly what you've said, that well, it's not like African slavery, it's not like the South. And my response is, how do you know? How do you know what that experience was like for
Yeah.
those individuals? Even me as a historian who has I'm basically interpreting based on the documents what the experiences were like. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly. But what I can point to is that, people were being captured, taken away from their homelands, from their language, and from their ancestry.
Mhm.
Little Kiowa girl, little Comanche boy who are severed forever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And their labor is not their own, and they're marginalized in this landscape, in these communities. And so people have said, well, it's not as bad as, it's different from.
Because there was a
Maybe,
war going on, and Spanish kids or Hispano children were captured and sent over to the Indians too.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
the slave trade went in multiple directions, though I actually did address that in my dissertation. For every one Hispano who is being captured, and they were being captured, there were 20 indigenous
Wow.
children being brought into a village. So the scale is a little bit different. The context is important to address, to say
Yes.
that the trade was multi-way, right? Utes were capturing Navajo people. Comanches were capturing Apache people. So it was in multiple directions. And we're interested in the experiences and the histories of those individuals who were captured, no matter who their captor were.
Right. And I think your point though that we can't say from our perspective in this century that it wasn't as bad as because that person lost their freedom and their community and their culture, whichever way it went. And for the dozens and dozens and hundreds and thousands probably over the years in New Mexico of people who then were assimilated into the Hispano community, they never got to go home and they became a
Yeah.
memory, so
And the other part of that, Inez, is that you know people, some people have said to me in the past, you can't judge the past based on present sort of morality, but here's the reality. As my wonderful deputy state historian Dennis Trujillo used to say, people know the difference between right and wrong in any era. There were abolitionists, people working to end captivity and slavery in all of the eras. I think of someone like Bartolome de las Casas, who witnessed firsthand, who himself enslaved people in the Caribbean, but then came to consciousness, realized that was happening was horrific, was actually a violation of the human condition. And so in that era, we're talking the 1400s, he actually pushed back and tried to actually create reforms. So again, the point is, in any era, people know the difference between right and wrong.
that's right. And what we can do from our perspective today is perhaps learn from their errors and mistakes and do better ourselves, one hopes.
One hopes, and
Yeah.
you've prompted the realization that slavery actually has continued. It's called modern human trafficking now. But if only, I mean, this is what we want to learn from the past so that we don't replicate those issues in the present.
Yeah. That's incredibly that's the reason you study history. One hope, Tell us what your website will be and where we can find it.
It is www.nativeboundunbound.org. www.nativeboundunbound.org. If anyone is interested in contacting us, you can reach out to us at info at nativeboundunbound.org.
All right. And on that note, this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Conversations Different, hosted by me, Inez Russell Gomez, editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our weekly episodes would not be possible without your support. We hope you enjoy them and keep listening. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Consider signing up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our podcast is available by visiting our website, santafenewmexican.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez is produced by Matt Dalside and Ernesto Cisneros, published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, a local and independent newspaper owned by Robin Martin.